Hi, welcome back to our next video in our Coffee and Chat with the Environmental Health Expert series. My name is Claire Nitchie, and I'm a health educator here at DOH. And joining me today is my teammate Barb Morrissey, who's our senior toxicologist working on PFAS or forever chemicals across the state for communities that have ongoing or unresolved exposures. Now, Barb, one of the questions that you and I get a lot when we're working with communities is, if I've got PFAS in my water, can I safely water my vegetable garden and eat my home-raised vegetables? And this is, I know, been something that's been a little difficult to answer because of kind of a knowledge gap in the science. So why, can you start just explaining to me, why is this such a concern?
Yeah, this is something we've been hearing from communities and we've been working hard on. The basic concern is that we know from research studies that PFAS can be taken up from soil and from water into plant roots. And then from there, the plant can distribute them to other parts of the plant, the stems, the leaves, the fruits, the things that we tend to eat. And what we're concerned about is that this could be another pathway of human exposure in communities that already have PFAS in their drinking water. So we want to understand whether this is a real problem or not, and we want to learn how to address it.
So when PFAS are taken up into the roots of a vegetable and then we eat them, it's possible that that could be another way of being exposed on top of having PFAS in our drinking water. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay.
That's a concern.
So there's thousands of different types of PFAS chemicals. And I know that, you know, the communities that we're working with, we've kind of got a main group, which are the ones we've got regulations on. But how does the type of PFAS chemical you have change whether or not this is a concern? Does it change? Like, which ones are we concerned about right now?
That's a great question. And actually, there's a lot of research into that right now. So we started out being mostly concerned about what we call long chain PFAS. So that's a category of PFAS chemicals that are a larger molecule, and they're still soluble in water, so they move with water, but they also like to bind onto proteins. And then there's another group that we call the short chain PFAS, and they're smaller and less likely to bind onto protein, more likely to move further with water.
So proteins in vegetables.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay.
So what we find with the long chain PFAS, and those are the ones that we are the most concerned about from a health standpoint, they do get taken up into the plants, but they tend to stay more in the roots.
Okay.
So they are concerned for things like carrots, but they're not so much a concern for things like zucchinis and tomatoes and berries. And so for the long chain, we're a little bit more worried about the root crops. And you know, a good illustration is some studies that Maine just did, where they were looking at corn, and they found the PFAS in the soil. It got into the roots of the corn. It's in the stem of the corn. It's in the leaves of the corn, not in the ear of the corn. So it's like it ends up accumulating in different parts of the plant.
So when you say, what are some examples of long chain PFAS that we've seen here in Washington State, and what are some examples of short chain PFAS?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the long chain PFAS that we're most concerned about are PFOS, PFOS, PFOA, PFOA, PFHXS. Those are the ones that we're seeing that are associated with the military foams and airport foams. And there's another one, PFNA. And there's another one called PFDA. So those are all kind of long chains. Short chain examples, PFBA, PFBS, and PFHXA, all things that we're also seeing in those mixes and that are getting into vegetables. So that's a few examples.
Okay, so we've talked about the long chain PFAS. What about short chain?
So yeah, short chain PFAS, we actually are seeing those get drawn into the plants, into the roots, and then they are moving much more easily around the plant than the long chain. It may be just because they're a smaller molecule. It may be some properties that they have, but they are showing up more in the leaves, in the stems, and even in the fruits. And so for the short chain PFAS, we are a little bit less concerned about the health risks of those. because we actually don't accumulate those in our body in the same way as we do with the long chain. So we can actually excrete those in our urine.
So they don't build up as fast, or they don't build up as much, and then our body gets rid of them faster, right?
Correct. So
Okay.
like our levels of concern for like how much could be in your diet on a daily basis are like 100 to 1,000 times higher for some of those short
wow.
chains. So kind of the bad news is we're getting more short chains probably through our vegetables. The good news is we're not quite as concerned about them.
Okay. So at what point, let's say I'm a community member who has PFAS chemicals in my water. We know that PFAS, they're usually in mixtures. They are, so you'll find quite a few of them, and you find them in water.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do I have to look at what I've got in my water and say, this is too high for me to garden safely?
Right.
And is there a level at which I can still garden safely? Because it sounds kind of like the plants aren't taking them, like absorbing the PFAS all at the same level, right?
Right. So like that basic question, like what is the level in water where it's no longer safe to irrigate my food garden? That's the question we want to answer.
Yeah.
We have a lot of exciting new data that's come in just in the last year from Europe, Australia, and even some U.S. states, especially Maine. I will call them out. And so we've got a lot more information about, where people have measured what's the PFAS levels in the soil and measured a lot of PFAS. What's the PFAS level in the rain or the water,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the PFAS level in the plants, in the parts that we eat? So we've got all these new data sets. So we're really moving forward on that question. I can't answer like what level is safe yet, and here's why. Scientists have observed big differences between how much PFAS actually gets up into plants from the soil and from the water, from study to study. And they're trying to understand what are the factors that influence that. Is it the soil type? Is it how much organic matter is there? Is it the life stage of the plant? For instance, Maine observed that when they were looking at uptake into hay that's used for animal feed, the first cutting had less PFAS than the second cutting of hay. So it could be the life stage that the plant is in, how much roots they have down, what have you. So they're trying to understand all those factors so that we can actually predict from a given soil type, a given concentration in the soil or concentration in the water, how much would be in those vegetables. And we're not quite there yet.
Wow. Okay, so making sure I understand that correctly, the amount of PFAS you have in the soil is not necessarily exactly the amount that you're going to have in the plants.
Correct.
Because that depends on the plant itself.
It does.
So are there certain types of plants, if I wanted to garden and I have PFAS in my water, that are safer to plant than others that I could
Yes.
still eat?
Yes.
And does that change by what concentrations in my water? I'm sure it's complicated.
It is complicated, and I would say kind of the key takeaways, like the general things that I could say is that we're seeing a lot of uptake into leafy greens. So spinach, lettuce, those kinds of greens that we grow to eat raw or cooked
And
or what have you.
uptake is the amount that's getting into the plant.
Right. So the
Okay.
amount of PFAS getting pulled up from the soil or the water is higher in those leafy greens, and that's the part we eat. Some stem plants like rhubarb, apparently very efficient at pulling it up, and it's in the stem. That's of course the part we eat. And then some protein-rich foods like beans seem to be able to pull more of the long chain PFAS into the protein part of the beans, which is what we eat. So the vegetables that are lower in PFAS consistently are potatoes, fruits like berries, tree fruit, and then tomatoes, squash, peppers, all the things that are like not leaves and not stems.
Yeah.
So further out, eggplants, pumpkins, melons, those kinds of things.
So no leaves, no stems.
Right. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be. It's so much more complicated than that. But I think you kind of can focus on the things that you know will be safer. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that there won't be any short chain PFAS in those things. It's just that we don't think that the levels that we see there will be as much of a concern.
Okay, so we have talked about how PFAS get into plants and what plants might be safer to grow. But if I'm concerned about how to lower the amount of PFAS in the plants that I already have, and also this like overall health of my garden, like lower the amount of PFAS in the soil, what can I do? What steps could I take?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of work going on right now on how to actually lower the amount of PFAS in the garden, in the soil. So if the PFAS have been in your well water and you've been using that to water your garden, there's going to be PFAS, especially the long chain PFAS, are still going to be bound to that soil. You'll have short chains in there too if they're in your water. But those leach out of the root zone a little faster than the long chains do. So, they will reduce over time by themselves. So there's some trials going on with they call it bioremediation. So they're using hemp plants, which are very efficient at pulling metals and all kinds of things out of the soil. They're using those to remove PFAS. So you plant a whole, group of hemp plants. It's a fiber plant. And they pull the PFAS up, and then you harvest those plants, you dry them, and then you dispose of them. So you're removing it from the garden soil. There's also experiments with adding organic matter that will bind up the PFAS so it's not available for your plants. So they're using different kinds of compost. They're using biochar, which is basically like charcoal. And so, there's trials going on with that. So we're excited to see, how those pan out. But in the meantime, there are some simple things that you could do. First, I tell people with gardens, if they have any animals on their farm or on their property that are producing manure, don't use that manure in your garden because those animals also been drinking that water, likely to have it in their manure. Adding organic matter is a good move, but make sure you know a little bit about what compost you're buying. So ask if it comes from, what's in that compost. Is it manure? Is it from biosolids? If that's true, then you should ask if they've tested for PFAS. Maybe peat is a better source, in that case.
Interesting.
And then, obviously trying to kind of focus on planting the safer plants. I think if the levels in your water are really high, in the hundreds of parts per trillion, I think you're probably looking at trying to either move your garden to a new plot that hasn't been gardened in before, applying a filter to your garden water. Some people have been using raised beds. They've been bringing in fresh soil, putting it on top, putting it high enough so that the crops that they're growing aren't getting down into the contaminated soil. So those are possibilities.
Barb, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me. And it's always so interesting to learn more about the science going on behind the work that you and I are doing out in the field with these impacted communities. If you want to learn more about PFAS, especially what you can do with your own garden, check out our website at doh.wa.gov/PFAS, where we have a bunch of different resources that help you understand what PFAS are, why they're a health concern, and for now, also what you can do if you do have PFAS in your water and you have a home-raised garden. You can also check out our PFAS Basics YouTube series for different action-centered videos that help you learn how to lower your exposure to PFAS in drinking water and consumer products. See you next time.